Welcome to BD 101 course at IIT Bombay. Professor Srivastava is going to deliver his lecture in Molecular and Cellular Biology module shortly. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you. Welcome to BD 101 course at IIT Bombay. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you.
Hello all, welcome to BD 101, Molecular and Cellular Biology. The cell cycle begins with its birth from a mother cell until its reproduction when it is divided into two new cells. The cell cycle helps in replenishing the old cells and deceased cells and helps in healing wounds. In this lecture, Professor Srivastava shall explain the different phases of the cell cycle. Thank you.
Hello students, welcome to BB 101 course. In the last lecture, I spoke to you about the need for interdisciplinary research and why biologists, medical practitioners and engineers, they should come together to work on the bigger problems. I also gave you example of various tech giants who are working in this area, who are really investing heavily currently for big bio projects. I also gave you examples of bio-inspired engineering and how different products, various type of innovations came because engineers were able to make observations from the nature and utilize their potential. We then talked about the tour of a cell. I gave you description of prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell and also different organelle of the cell, what is their function. In discussion session, we also talked about what could be possibilities of the cell origin, from where the chloroplast, mitochondria they came from. We had questions regarding the cell division. So in today's lecture, I am going to address many of these points. The outline of today's presentation is, I'll first give you a tour of the cell, then review the concept of different organelle which we spoke in the last lecture. We'll then talk about evolutionary origin of the cells. I'll then move on to the cell cycle, different processes involved in mitosis and meiosis. We'll then talk about the dysregulation of the cell may also result into disease like cancer and how that happens. And finally, I'll talk about the cell reprogramming and cloning, which is a very exciting topic. So let us review the tour of a cell, and I'm going to recap what we spoke in the previous lecture in the animation.
Prokaryotes are simple unicellular organisms that lack a well-defined nucleus for carrying their genetic material. They are usually a few microns in size and are one of the most ancient life forms known, from which eukaryotes are believed to have evolved. Click on each component to know more about them. Bacteria can be divided into two major groups based on the structure of their cell wall and thereby their response to Gram staining. The cell wall of Gram-positive bacteria is composed of mainly polysaccharides and glycosylated molecules. It is made up of a single 20 to 80 nanometer thick homogeneous layer of peptidoglycan. In addition, cell wall usually contains teichoic acid, which is covalently connected to either peptidoglycans itself or to plasma membrane lipids. Plasma membrane is composed of a bilayer sheet of phospholipid molecules with their polar heads on the surface and their fatty acyl chains forming the interior. Gram-negative bacteria have a more complex cell wall. They have a relatively thin peptidoglycan layer around 2 to 7 nanometer, covered by a 7 to 8 nanometer thick outer membrane made up of lipopolysaccharides. Porin proteins are present in the outer membrane, which allows passage of small molecules across the membrane. Nuclear material in the bacteria cell is not separated from the cytosol by a distinct nuclear membrane. However, it is usually concentrated in a specific clear region of the cytoplasm called the nucleoid. The genetic material usually contains a single circular DNA molecule. Ribosomes are composed of proteins and ribosomal RNA. The prokaryotic 70S ribosome is made up of a 50S large subunit and a 30S small subunit, where S refers to the Swedberg coefficient, which provides an indication about rate of sedimentation of the particle. A motile bacterium propels itself from one place to another within the medium by rotating its flagella. A bacterial flagellum is made up of the protein flagellin. It has a helical structure with a sharp bend called the hook just outside the membrane and a basal body containing the motor just below the membrane. To swim forward, the flagella rotate in counterclockwise direction. However, when flagellar rotation abruptly changes to clockwise direction, the bacterium tumbles in its place and seems incapable of moving. It then begins swimming again in another new random direction. Typical animal cell lacks a cell wall and contains several membrane-bound organelles such as nucleus, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum ER, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes and peroxisomes. Click on each component to know more about them. An electron micrograph image of a plasma cell is shown here, clearly depicting the nucleus, Golgi material, lysosome and mitochondrion. Click on each component to know more about them. Plant cells have a rigid cell wall and membrane-bound organelles such as nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast, endoplasmic reticulum ER, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, vacuoles and peroxisomes. Click on each component to know more about them. Mitochondria, commonly referred to as powerhouse of the cell, are membrane-bound organelles found in eukaryotic cells. They are responsible for generation of ATP to satisfy the body's energy requirements and are also involved in other processes such as cell signaling, cell cycle control, and cell growth. The organelle is made up of several compartments that carry out specialized functions and also contains its own independent genome that codes for mitochondrial proteins. Ribosomes, which are composed of proteins and ribonucleic acids, RNAs, play a central role in protein biosynthesis. They read the nucleic acid information from messenger RNA and convert this into the corresponding amino acid code of proteins. Eukaryotic ATS ribosomes are composed of a large 40S subunit which binds to tRNA and amino acids, and a small 28S subunit which binds to mRNA during protein synthesis. The subunit structure of prokaryotic and eukaryotic ribosomes differ from one another. The endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus are involved in synthesis, packaging, and transport of various biomolecules. The ribosome-studded rough ER is a major site for protein synthesis, while the smooth ER synthesizes lipids, steroids, metabolizes carbohydrates and steroids, and regulates calcium concentration in muscles. The Golgi complex functions to process and package macromolecules such as proteins and lipids for their export to various other cellular organelles or outside the cell. The nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle found in eukaryotic cells that is often considered as the control center of the cell. It houses the genetic material of the cell in the form of chromosomes containing DNA molecules complexed with proteins known as histones. The nucleus is responsible for maintaining this genetic information by replication and for expression of genes performing various functions. The nucleolus is mainly involved in ribosome assembly, after which the ribosomes are exported to the cytoplasm for protein synthesis. Lysosomes are found exclusively in animal cells for degrading any intracellular debris. They contain hydrolytic enzymes within sacs which can digest and degrade any unwanted material when released. Peroxisome is an organelle containing enzyme like catalase that are responsible for protecting the cell against free radicals and peroxides. They also play a role in metabolism of very long-chain fatty acids. They have a single membrane and no independent genetic system.
Origin of life, origin of cell, these are some of the most challenging questions to address in the field of biology. Reason is that what we are talking is on the time scale of billions of years ago, right? What happened in 3.5 to 4.5 billion years ago. So those things could just be some predictions. One could make some hypothesis and try to simulate those environment and see that how the cell origin happened. But of course, we cannot have very concrete evidence to really provide the exactly what happened at that time, right? So that's where there are many things which we are going to speak now in the evolution of cell is going to be more hypothetical, and there are only partial evidences has been provided for addressing such theories and these hypotheses.
So how did mitochondria and chloroplast evolve from their prokaryotes? It remains really one of the very interesting questions to be addressed. How did these eukaryotic cells evolved from these prokaryotic cells, right? And while we can't say for sure what could have happened at that time with the billions of years ago, but a lot of scientific experiments, they suggest that mitochondria and plastid, they originated from bacteria. So they were formerly some small prokaryote which started living within the eukaryotic cell. And initially, the mitochondria was engulfed as aerobic bacteria, which became part of the cell. And then later on, the photosynthetic bacteria also got in touch with this cell, which is the eukaryotic cell, and now became part of that. So this theory, which is this is known as endosymbiont theory, that explains that how a cell lives within another cell, and this association could be beneficial to both. So after mitochondria got engulfed, now chloroplast, as a part of any photosynthetic bacteria that was engulfed in the cell, and now that became part of this eukaryotic cell with these invasions. And slowly, the cell adapted that and became part of the cell. So probably mitochondria came first in the cell, and then later on the chloroplast was also part of that. So there is much of the speculations here, but we will try to address this in the endosymbiotic theory.
So let us now discuss the model for endosymbiotic origin. As I explained that this endosymbiotic relationship is going to be beneficial to both, where one organism lives inside the cell or the cells of another organism. When this bacteria came in touch with this primitive cell and that became part of that, that could have been one of the defining moments in the origin of eukaryotes and in the evolution. There's a hypothesis that mitochondria might have evolved from the aerobic proteobacteria through this process of endosymbiosis. So scientists keep contemplating and providing some evidences that maybe the proteobacteria, which is having capacity to do the oxidative phosphorylation, that came in touch with this eukaryotic cell and became part of it. And now because it has double membrane, one membrane came from the eukaryotic cell, another membrane came from the prokaryotic cell. Further, the studies of plastid-bearing eukaryotes that suggest that even the chloroplast might have evolved from the cyanobacterium, the bacteria which has capability to perform photosynthesis. And not only the just this bacteria which provided eventually the chloroplast, but also there are some other ancestors of these algae, like red algae and green algae. Even they were subsequently engulfed, and that resulted into some other eukaryotes which formed as a part of the secondary endosymbiosis. So that's a little more complicated, but let's focus on the primary endosymbiosis, that probably one of the cyanobacterium got engulfed in the eukaryotic cell and developed into the chloroplast, which has capability of performing photosynthesis. A scientist named Lynn Margulis, she gets credit to advocate for endosymbiotic theory. And her thought that these free-living bacteria eventually show the symbiotic relationship and formed the mitochondria and chloroplast was quite wild in the beginning, but then scientists started performing the experiments and found that some of the DNA sequences or biochemical characteristics of plastid and mitochondria, they are closer to the prokaryotes, and probably that could have been the reason that these prokaryotic cells were engulfed by the early eukaryotic cells. So over the evolutionary time period, most of these bacterial genes, which is part of the plastid or the mitochondria, they were probably lost from these organelles DNA. And this is scientist Lynn Margulis who showed this hypothesis. But again, a fun exercise for you is to look into uh, some of the gene sequences and think about the mitochondrial DNA genes, how to compare those for different type of bacteria, and try to look at, they belong to which clades and what kind of sequence similarities they have. So something like I showed you in the protein sequences, one could try out these at the DNA sequences as well. Let us now talk about cell cycle. So, a German scientist, his name was Rudolf Virchow, he described that where a cell exists, there must have been a pre-existing cell, right? And this concept was termed as omnis cellula e cellula, which means that for every cell, there must have been origin from another cell. And that's rightly mentioned by him because the life actually starts from a single cell with a fusion of a sperm cell and egg cell. The nuclei of these two fuses in the fertilization process and forms the embryo, right, which then leads to the birth of a new individual. So life essentially continues from this cell division or reproduction of these cells. During the process of cell division, it distributes the DNA of a mother cell equally between the two daughter cells so that now the cell is able to proliferate, but the cell ploidy still remains the same. This cell proliferation is very important for all our growth, repair, reproduction, all of these phenomena. So some of the basic terminologies regarding the cellular organization of the genetic material. I have just described here a few terminologies. For instance, genome, which consists of all the DNA molecules in the eukaryotic cell or that single DNA molecule in the prokaryotic cell. Somatic cells, these are essentially the non-reproductive cell, right, which are having two sets of chromosomes. Gametes, these are from the reproductive cells, essentially from sperm and eggs, and they have half the chromosome as the somatic cells. So some of these things you might already have studied earlier. Just a refresher that we will be keep interchanging these terms and talking about somatic cells and gamete cells. So these are details of those. Let me now describe briefly about the cell cycle. Right. So cell cycle constitute various important phases which are quite crucial for the cell division to happen. And here there is, while we have G1 phase, S phase, G2 phase, and M phase or the mitotic phase. The most important one is the mitotic phase, because that's where the cell division to happen. But before a cell gets divided, the preparation part of that takes much longer time, and that comes under the interphase, which is what you see the bigger part of the circle from G1, S, and G2 phase together. That is known as interphase. And that is the growth period, right, where cell is trying to prepare itself before it gets divided. And in the process, there are several checkpoints. These are the checkpoints which ensures that things are actually proceeding properly. And while this kind of activities are happening, the G1, G2, and M check phases, what I have put in the boxes, those are important to ensure that the activities from G1 phase to S phase and G2 phase, they are progressing properly. And now cell is ready to divide in the M phase. So there is a German scientist, his name was Fleming. He developed some dyes and he was trying to observe the behavior of chromosomes. And while doing so that, he was studying mitosis and cytokinesis, but he observed that cell was simply taking much longer time. And that time it was not very clear that why that is happening. But now we know that, it's not only mitosis process, which takes a much shorter time, but the interphase, which is much longer time for the cell to get prepared. And that's why probably it was taking longer time to grow these, the entire period of the stain. So I just described that these are the crucial events, interphase, which involves G1 phase, S phase, which is the replication phase of the DNA, and then the G2 phase. So mitotic phase, which is where the cell division is going to happen, it's going to alternate with the interphase, which is the growth period, right? And the daughter cells are going to repeat this cycle. So G1 phase is the first part of interphase to prepare the cell for the growth activities to happen. In the S phase, DNA replication happens and the chromosomes gets duplicated. They get condensed and then they get duplicated. In G2 phase, which is the last part of the interphase, now cells ensures that everything has went properly here and cell is now ready to move to the mitotic phase or the M phase. Even after mitosis completes, there is activity known as cytokinesis, which means division of the cytoplasm, which also happens equally into daughter cells. So not only the genetic material, the chromosomes get divided, but also the cytoplasm get divided with the process of cytokinesis. So cell cycle has two major activity which we'll be discussing. One is mitosis, other is meiosis. In mitosis, division of the somatic cells being studied. In meiosis, division of gametes, especially sperm and ova. Mitosis is going to give rise to two daughter cells, which will have the same amount of DNA as the mother cell. Whereas in case of meiosis, it will have four daughter cells, which are going to produce half the amount of DNA as the mother cells. All right, so now let us discuss about mitosis. Why mitosis is important, right? So to have the growth and repair and for any of the living organisms growth, you need to produce the new cells, right? And those cells are going to replace the old cells which are dying or lost or damaged. So mitosis is going to continuously produce the new cells to identical daughter cells, which is important for the growth, differentiation, and repair. Let me show you some basic concepts of the chromosomes. So let's say each of the duplicated chromosome, they have two sister chromatids, right? And these sister chromatids, which you can see here, are one chromosomes. And likewise, let's say that, in this cell, we have three chromosomes from father and three from mother, right? So N equals to 3 from both the parents. So now you are having three set of chromosomes, each is having these duplicate sister chromatids. And these chromatids, they contain identical DNA molecule, which is attached along with the length of this entire thing with proteins known as cohesins, which form the complexes and keeps them together. Now in the red color, I'm showing, let's say, from mother, and the black color one, the chromosomes from father. Each of these sister chromatids, they are having the centromere, which is a region where these chromosome DNA, for the chromatids is going to attach, right, in the sister chromatids. So now there'll be a couple of terminologies, and that's why I thought to draw here and show you that now let's say one chromosome from father, one chromosome from mother, they are coming together, right? So so now you have to think about that, you understood the chromosome, you understood the chromatids, you understood the centromere. Now these are going to be pair of homologous chromosomes because these are forming the pair and they are same chromosomes from father, one from mother. So they are going to form the pair of homologous chromosomes, which is identical. So now when you have these sister chromatids, which is, let's say, either for the red one or for the black one, those are sister chromatids. But when one for the red one with the black one, they're getting paired, those are non-sister chromatids, right? So again, in the DNA replication, when the chromosome is getting condensed, it is getting ready for the division to happen, and the chromatin fibers, they become quite dense that time, and they make these chromosomes much thicker. And what we see now, the duplicated chromosome has these two sister chromatids. So these are now, I think it's clear with the arrow that one from the red and one from the black, those are non-sister chromatids. And what you see on this side here is these are the sister chromatids in the black color. Yes, just to give the visual feel of this concept again, this is a chromosome when we have the pair of sister chromatids. Centromere is the DNA which is hidden behind this kinetochore proteins. And these kinetochore proteins are attached to the centromere. These are one chromatid and second chromatid. I showed you example when we have this maternal set of chromosomes in red or paternal set of chromosomes in blue. These chromatids of either blue colored or the red colors will be known as sister chromatids. And when they come together, one from the blue, one from the red, that is non-sister chromatids, forming the homologous pairs of the chromosomes. And this one, what you see here, that is the centromere. So I hope some of these basic terminology will become much clearer to you now, because these are going to come to you when we talk about mitosis and meiosis. So next point comes at how DNA is tightly packed in the nucleus of every cell. And this point we discussed briefly when we discussed about the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. And we also discussed about how the archaea was having more similarity with the eukarya as compared to the prokaryotes. So I had discussed this concept in that context that eukaryotes have these histone proteins, and these are 8 distinct histone proteins which are attached to the DNA molecule, and they form nucleosome. And then these nucleosomes, they come together, and the fiber of these nucleosomes, that is known as chromatin. So that's where before the cell division happens, in the interphase time, when we have this S phase happening for the DNA replication, all this chromatin material gets condensed, and that actually is now getting really tightly packed with the nucleosomes. So in the process of mitosis in the cell cycle, the interphase prepared the cell for the division to happen. And during the S or the replication phase, that's where all this chromatin material gets condensed, and now to have sufficient material for division to happen. And then mitosis actually starts, which can be divided into the following important phases, especially 5 stages of prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase. Then we have the telophase, and finally cytokinesis. So in the prophase, the chromatins, they are getting condensed into discrete chromosomes, and now the nuclei, it is also getting disappeared from the nucleus. Each chromosome appears as 2 sister chromatids joined at a centromere. So I hope those terminology which we spoke earlier is now becoming clearer to you. And during this process now, the centrosome, they move apart, and mitotic spindles, they starts to form, right? And so here the mitotic spindle is quite important in the prophase, because it is, really starts appearing at that time. And this is made of the fibers, made of microtubules and several proteins. So that itself is quite interesting topic to study. And there are researchers who are really studying quite in detail about the cell division and role of these microtubules, especially one of our faculty colleague from our department in bioengineering. He has done some really seminal work in the microtubules and potential targets for different type of drug discovery work in this area. So the next comes the prometaphase. And here now the nuclear membrane that starts getting fragmented. Microtubules, they start to grow further. And each of the 2 chromatids in this chromosome, they have the kinetochore proteins, which is getting attached to the centromere now. Microtubules, they start getting attached to these kinetochore proteins. And now what you see is the kinetochore microtubules or non-kinetochore microtubules. These are the kinetochore proteins in the center. So now this is the phase when cell started, trying to find 2 different poles and slowly moving towards the, for the cell division to happen. but still it has not completely prepared for that until unless in the metaphase, when now there are metaphase plate being formed, and then now all these uh, chromosomes they assemble at the metaphase plate, which is with the same distance or equidistance between the two poles of the from the spindles, right? And each of the chromosome sister chromatids, these are attached to the microtubules arising from these opposite poles. So I think these are this is a really important activity, because the cell is really getting prepared for division to happen, and now all these chromosomes they have to divide into two daughter cells, and they have to maintain the ploidy level. So now they have reached to the equidistance in the cell, and now in the anaphase only they start further separating, which is quite important activity because, as I mentioned earlier, there are a set of proteins like cohesins which keep them attached, these chromatids. And now for them to actually move apart, these cohesins are going to play a very important role. There are a set of proteins, the part of the cohesin complex, which plays important role. Now these sister chromatids to get separated, and each chromatid has to now behave as the chromosome. So now these, both of the sister chromatids, as you can see now, they are moving towards the opposite poles. Now they are getting separated, and daughter chromosomes, now they are moving towards the opposite poles in the anaphase. Finally, the telophase, where now the two daughter nuclei forms in the cell, and nuclear envelope starts reappearing, and you are now seeing that okay, cell is almost dividing into two daughter cell, and therefore nucleolus started forming again in both of these daughter cells, and nuclear envelope started emerging and started forming because the eukaryotic cell have these nuclear membrane. And in the process, these spindle microtubules, they get depolymerized. The chromosomes becomes less condensed. And now the process of nucleus division, which is known as karyokinesis. Karyon is the nucleus, the term given for nucleus. So now the division of the nucleus happens in the process of karyokinesis. And this now completes that now the entire nuclear material is now duplicated into two daughter cells. But it still have not divided into two daughter cells completely. That only will happen when the cytokinesis process will happen, which is in the animal cells, you will see these kind of cleavage furrows to be formed. And those are going to distribute the cytoplasm into equal half into two daughter cells. And that is very important now for this mitosis process to get completed. Now this thing, unlike animal cells, when we have these cleavage furrows, in the plant cells, the same cleavage furrows are not going to happen, but rather they have the cell plates which is being formed. And these cell plates, then they slowly start making these two daughter cells separate. So that is one of the key differences here, that rather than cytokinesis getting completed with the cleavage furrows or the cell furrows to happen, now here the cytokinesis in the plants will happen with the cell plate, which is getting formed in between the two daughter cells. All right, after discussing mitosis, now let's talk about meiosis, right? And why meiosis is important. So for the from the parents to the offspring, the genetic characteristics remains maintained. And when you have siblings, so what you realize that even in the same family, there is variation among the siblings, right? So your brother or sister, they exactly don't look same like you. And that is because of the genetic variation which happens because of the shuffling of the genes during the process of meiosis along with these chromosomes. So we are going to study that how these chromosome exchange happens and the gene shuffling happens in the process of meiosis. But before we take the overview of this process, I think some of the basic concepts are important here. As you know that each of the human somatic cell, they contains 46 chromosomes. Here we have shown the entire life cycle with the haploid cycle with the blue color and the diploid cycle with the pink color. So the number of chromosome in one haploid cell will be 23, and when you have the two sets, which will be in the zygote, that will make it 46 chromosomes. So 2n becomes 46, right? So that's where you'll see this term that there is a 2n or diploid, and that total gives the 46 chromosomes. The process of meiosis is going to reduce these number of chromosome sets from the diploid and make them to the haploid forms. So it's really important how to maintain the ploidy level, and that's what we are going to describe in the life cycle here. So from these gametes, the egg cell or the sperm cell, which is egg and the sperm, they have now these are going to get fertilized and form the diploid zygote or 2n, which will become now 46 chromosomes. And then the duplication of these cells happens so that the ploidy remains same. Now the mitosis and development process happens where the multicellular diploid adults are being formed with the 2n remains the 46 here. And again from the ovary and from the testis, the sperm being produced, ovary, these or the eggs are being produced. So they are, after the meiosis process, they are becoming haploid, which is shown in the blue color here, or the green. And then that becomes the haploid gametes from both of them. And then again, after fertilization, it is becoming the 2n. So this is the alternating cycles from the, after the meiosis, it becomes haploid. And then after fertilization, they become diploid. They continue to remain diploid with the mitosis and make more copies of the cell. So I hope these small terminologies probably are clear to you. You might have studied them earlier, and it's much more clearer that how these life cycle works. Let us now talk about the process of meiosis, which is in many ways, some of the key events remain same like mitosis, but then there are some key differences here as well. So rather than going into each of the detail in quite a bit of detail, I'm trying to summarize the meiosis process, and so that we don't have to go through a lot of details again for meiosis. So let us start with the same parent cell which we discussed earlier. So before the chromosome duplication, now this is the 2n equals to 6. We talked about 3 of the maternal and 3 of the paternal, these chromosomes. In the process of mitosis, in the first phase of the prophase, the chromosome duplication happens. And now you see these 2 sister chromatids, these are getting duplicated, which is in the process of metaphase, they are lining up on the metaphase plate, right? Now, what happens in the meiosis? In meiosis, actually having 2 cycles, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. That is one of the difference to start with from mitosis and meiosis. Now, in meiosis 1, you have the same set of events what happens in mitosis. So let's say now we have prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1. So all these activities happen. So in prophase 1, now what you see here, the chromosome duplication here happens as well. And there is a very important activity here happens. What you see is a kind of a nick here, which is from the blue chromosome and the red chromosome, there are some genes which are getting interchanged here. And that is very important, as I said, for the genetic variation to happen in the prophase 1 because of the crossing over or the chiasmata formation. Some of the blue, the genes from that chromosome are moving towards the red one, and some of the red ones are coming to the blue one. So these homologous chromosomes, they are paired, with these chiasmata and the sister chromatids with the protein group, which I told to you about the cohesins. So now these pairs, which is being formed with the with these homologous chromosomes, they are getting lined up at the metaphase plate. So rather than individual chromosomes, which was the case in the mitosis metaphase, in the metaphase 1 of meiosis, the pair of the entire homologous chromosomes from both maternal and paternal side, they are getting lined up at the metaphase plate. Now in mitosis, in the anaphase and telophase, now you start seeing them getting separated into 2 daughter cells, and they are forming the sister chromatids, they're getting separated, and the ploidy remains maintained. 2n was started with, and 2n remains the same in mitosis. Now here what happens, now these, as I mentioned, the genetic exchange happens in the recombination activity where with the crossing over. So these homologous, they are going to get separated in the end of phase one. And then what you can see here, some of the red ones got the blue ones as well, and some of the blue ones got the red one as well. This is a very important activity to make meiosis different than mitosis, and that's what we said, that each individual has some genetic variability because of these crossing over events and these recombination events which happen in the meiosis. So now these daughter cells are formed in the meiosis 1 and they are haploid still. So then in the second phase of meiosis, which is meiosis 2, they are going to get duplicated and make now two daughter cells. And therefore now in the meiosis, you eventually got four daughter cells. Each one of them is now having ploidy N. And now they have also interchanged the genetic material. So this is the final output of the meiosis. This is the final output of mitosis. So the key event to keep in mind is the chiasmata, which is the site of crossing over, which is very important here in the prophase. Pair of homologous chromosomes, which are lined up at the metaphase plate. And these homologs are getting separated in the anaphase 1, which is not the case in the anaphase of mitosis. So just to conclude this slide, essentially what we learned that there are some key differences in mitosis and meiosis event. Meiosis is going to reduce these number of chromosome sets from the 2 diploid to make it to the 1 haploid forms, whereas mitosis is going to keep it conserved the same number of chromosome sets from the 2n, and the ploidy remains maintained with the 2n. There are several key events here which makes meiosis quite unique, and synapses and crossing over is very important in that way, because that is the place when these genetic exchange happens of these material. And then we have these homologous pair which is moving along after forming on the metaphase plate. Then they are moving to the anaphase 1. So I hope some of these points are clear to you, and I'm going to now describe you a table which is from your textbook. So here some of the key events are described, that in mitosis we have the DNA replication which occurs during the interphase before mitosis begins, whereas in case of meiosis it occurs only in the before the meiosis 1 begins. So that is the key difference to keep in mind, because here you are going to see 2 set of events in meiosis, only 1 set of event in the mitosis. So number of divisions here is only 1, which includes prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. In case of meiosis, there are 2 number of divisions are going to happen, each including a prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, but interphase happens only once. Synapse formation of the homologous chromosome does not occur here, whereas in case of meiosis, it occurs during the prophase 1, and along with these crossing over between the non-sister chromatid, it results into the chiasmata formation because of the sister chromatids which are closely tied each other with the cohesin proteins. Number of daughter cells and genetic composition, if you want to compare, there are 2 daughter cells being formed as a part of the product of the mitosis. Each one of them is identical to the parent cell, which is having the same ploidy, same number of chromosomes. In case of meiosis, as we just saw, it was having 4 daughter cells being produced. Each is haploid. They're genetically different from the parent cell and from each other. What is the role of mitosis in the animal or the plant body? It's very important for all the growth and development activity to happen, whereas the meiosis is important for producing the gametes, for the all the genetic variability which we see among the gametes, or even in the plants when we see in the spores. So I hope that gives you at least fair bit of idea of the key events which are occurring in meiosis and how they are different from the standard process what we have learned in the mitosis. Let us now talk about the cell cycle regulation, and if it is not regulated properly, there is a dysregulation that may result into a disease like cancer. So the cancer cells are going to disrupt the normal cell behavior and their regulation, and going to divide out of control, forming the tumors, right? So let's revisit our concepts of the cell cycle. And, this is the cyclic operating set of molecules which are regulating the entire activity of the cell cycle. And there are different checkpoints, as I described earlier. There is a G1 checkpoint, there is a G2 checkpoint, there is an M checkpoint. So these checkpoints are very important to control the cell to proceed or not, or whether it is stop or go ahead signal, that kind of signals being given to regulate the cycle, right? And now you may think it is like a speed breaker when you are going from a bike on a road, and you are crossing the speed limit. So then there are these kind of checkpoints, either with the police or with the blocker on the roads, which is going to keep your speed under control. Likewise, in the cell, there is these checkpoints, but physically, what those checkpoints could be in the cell, those are going to be again the various molecules like proteins, which is going to regulate those activities, right? So let me show you how this regulation works, which is depending on different set of molecules. And the proteins which are crucially involved in this process of regulating the cell cycle, those are known as protein kinases. Other group of proteins are also known as cyclins. So kinases, these are the broad family of the protein, which are essentially enzymes which activate, or they are going to inactivate the proteins with the cascade of event which involves phosphorylation or dephosphorylation. So there are a set of proteins or the family of the cyclins along with the cyclin dependent kinases, which is all involved in this particular process of cell cycle regulation. So it is important to keep in mind that while we do not have any physical roadblock here to control the cell cycle, but these checkpoints are being governed with the interplay of cyclins and cyclin dependent kinases. Proteins here, which are cyclin dependent kinases, they are actually present or expressed throughout this cell cycle, where these protein cyclins, they are essentially being produced with the DNA replication event when that is happening in the S phase. So along with S phase completion, the cyclin proteins also being produced, and now they are coming and binding to the cyclin dependent kinases, or the CDKs, shown in the blue color here, and the red ones are the cyclin protein, the triangles. So when they come and bind, that means now the cell is ready to proceed for the next cycle. And only once they reach to complete the mitosis part, after mitosis complete, then the CDK, cyclin dependent kinases, and the cyclin protein, they get dissociated. So that means that is the indicator at the M checkpoint that now this activity is complete and now they can dissociate. So, and then now again, they're again moving to the cyclic form. And so what you see, like, the checkpoints essentially are being regulated with the activities of cyclin and cyclin dependent kinases, which is going to ensure that the cell cycle regulates properly. So as I mentioned earlier, in the S phase, you have the cyclins which are being synthesized. They're getting accumulated. And then the cyclin dependent kinases are already present in the all of these stages. With this checkpoint of the G2, now this complex being formed, which is cyclin CDK complex, which allows now the cell to enter into the mitotic phase. After it completes the mitosis, now the CDKs, they get dissociated with the cyclins, and now cell senses that now this process is getting complete. Again, their CDKs are available throughout the cycle, and cyclins are going to be more synthesized in the next process of the DNA replication. All right. Yeah. So while discussing this, I think it's really important to realize that this entire cell cycle regulation, which is quite crucial with the G1 phase of the interphase, when the cell is started to divide, not divide, but at least preparing to divide. And once the G1 phase goes well of the interphase, then cell actually completes the S phase, G2 phase, and M phase, right? So then the entire cycle gets completed. Whereas if the G1 phase has any problem, then cell might go to the exit mode. So it may not continue to the whole cycle. Scientists have actually thought about that, can we try to control the G1 phase somehow and regulate that? And that's where, a term known as the G0 phase, which is essentially how to stop these activities and keep the cell into that static state, right, of the cell cycle. And that was the important concept which is being used in the cloning of the mammal cells or the animal cell, which we will talk in some time. But keep in mind that this cell cycle regulation is governed with these four major components: G1, S, G2, and M phase, where the different checkpoints at the G1, G2, and the M phase. Nutrients, growth factors. There are even issues like space. Even that could be quite important for the cell to grow. For instance, think about in the human body we have limited space, and there are billions of cells which are growing there. So the space is going to be limitation for the cell to continue growing or to stop. And that's where the process known as the density dependent inhibition. It means if it has reached to sufficient density and cells are crowded, they will stop dividing. For the cell to actually start growing or continue to divide, they also need a substrate when they can get adhered or get attached, and that is known as the encourage dependence, right? These are important terms to keep in mind when we think about comparing it with the cancer cell. So now in the cancer cell, the cells are not going to obey any of the checkpoints which we talk. So they're not going to stop at the G1 checkpoint, G2 checkpoint, M checkpoints, and they will continue to revolve, without any control. They do not obey the density dependent inhibition process. It means even there is sufficient density being achieved, they will continue to grow, and that's where they will form multiple layer of cells. Those form the tumor mass, right? And that's why you see that in the cancer the tumor is being formed. They are not even requiring any specific substrate to get attached or to then grow, and they can free float and still make multiple copies of that. So they do not require encourage with the substratum, and that also makes them provides a lot of ability for the cancer cell to spread from one to other place. And you might have heard that in some individuals, the primary tumor was removed, and they were actually doing fine for some time after some chemotherapy treatment. But after some time, after a couple of years, disease again progressed, in the individual, and that is known as metastatic, which means now the cancer has progressed from one location to some other location, which was not the primary tumor place. It's very commonly happens in the breast cancer in the women, when even after removing the tumor from the breast, still after a couple of years of the things looks normal, but now the tumor cell, all of a sudden, few tumor cells which are left, which have grown now, they will just jump from one location and move to other organs. So they sometimes move to the bone, sometimes move to the liver, sometimes move to the lung. So some of these organs are really key places where these cells go quickly and jump over there and now start forming another tumor over there. Now that is the place which is really difficult now to control the cancer, because once they move from the primary to the secondary location, they are really unstoppable. That's very difficult to treat them. And that is one of the biggest challenges still in the field of cell biology and the medicine, how to control the metastatic cancer. And there are a lot of thoughts that what makes these cancer cells to only go to those specific places for a given tumor. It does not go to every place, like it will not go to brain, it may not go to other organ or heart, but why only goes to lung or liver or bone. Could be because there might be at least some substrate which is giving its potential to get attached and anchored, and that is favoring that homing environment for these cells to again divide and grow. But some of these, I'll leave you with this thought to think about what happens in the cancer cell and what makes them so much uncontrolled. There's a lot of research going on, and these are some of the food for thoughts for you, that why the cell growth is a problem in the cancer, how long these cancer cell they live for, and how to really control them, because they're really powerful, and what really makes these cancer cells so powerful that we are not able to treat them with different drugs and different chemicals, and they still after some time they acquire resistance and they start regrowing. Why don't cancer cells die normally like like other normal cells? what are the checkpoints which are missing in these cancer cells? How do the cancer cell escape destruction? And of course, the metastatic is really the one of the biggest challenge in the field. So with this, I think you are now pretty much aware that while you have understood quite a bit about the cell cycle and regulation of the cell cycle, still there are many things which have not been understood well. And that's where these kind of diseases keep reminding us, still there is a lot of scope and need to do more research and understand basic sciences in much better way. There are different technology which we have been keep discussing, that we need to come up with the new technologies which are quite useful for cancer detection. Some of them also look for early detection of the tumor cell. One technology I just showed you here is from the United States Food and Drug Administration, known as USFDA. It is approved from them based on measurement of the circulating tumor cells, CTC cell, which is known as circulating tumor cells. That could be detected using different technologies. And now there are some clearance already being given that one could try to capture the CTC cell to look for early cancer detection. There are some immunocytological technologies available where they look for some specific protein markers of the cancer. You might have heard that somebody is having a prostate cancer, they are being tested for PSA, prostate specific antigen. And likewise in the women for the breast and ovarian cancer, genes like HER2, EGFR, P53. These are the kind of hotspot mutation proteins, which is as a marker, sets as a marker. Their higher level in these individuals indicates that they might be having these cancer. So these immunocytological technology, they try to look for some antibody markers and try to detect those. There is a cell search system, which is a famous technology, and various other technologies are currently in the process of detecting these circulating tumor cell by looking at these markers. Also, there are some RNA-based molecular technologies which is looking at like the real-time PCR methods, how to detect those RNA transcripts from these circulating tumor cells. So again, some of these technology we will talk when we talk about the DNA tools. But I'm just giving you some hint, some idea that there are many unexplored territories in this area where still there is a need and a scope to come up with a robust technology where you can detect a primary tumor or the metastatic tumor. On one hand, to just detect, and second, can we control that? Are there factors which we can identify by which we can simply try to control the progression of these tumor cell and their further progress into the either making them from benign to the to the real severe form of the tumor, or to make them into the metastatic tumor. So some of these are still quite challenging thoughts, but this is the field when there is a lot of investment, lot of research going on from both academia as well as industry. So cell reprogramming and cloning, these are some of the most interesting scientific fictions to say, where a lot of discoveries happen. The concept of cloning is essentially like photocopying. And here you are trying to make a product, which is a living organism, which is exactly same to the parent. So cloning of plants, you might have observed some of the plants nearby your residence. If the leaf falls, probably they regrow into the complete new plant, right? So there are many plants which has ability to do this activity, and this is just one of the example. But scientifically, what happens in any of the plant mature cells, they can de-differentiate any of the plant mature cells, and they can give rise to all specialized cells, which can result into the complete organism, right? And that is the kind of potential which these cells have, that is known as totipotency. So on the experimental side, one experiment is shown here, that if you take a carrot and the small pieces of the carrot roots, which is minced off, and then you have tried to put them in a culture condition. A culture is something which can provide the nutrition for these cells to grow. And then these cells are going to further grow and de-differentiate and form this callus. Then if you add different hormones like gibberellic acid and cytokine, these are the hormones like cytokinin and gibberellic acid. They help into root and shoot development. So now this callus, which has come from the plant cell, is going to result into complete carrot, right? And so now what you are seeing, cloning of a plant is starting from these cells. So plant cloning has been really utilized for many applications, and even many ornamental plants like orchids. Even these are clones of the original plant. Cloning could also be used for some specialized valuable characteristics to generate, for instance, resistance to the plant pathogens. So you can see many applications of plant cloning. Whereas when it comes to the animal cloning or even human cloning, then it becomes more challenging and more fascinating. And a lot of emphasis and competition has been in this area of research. So long back in 1950s, scientist Dr. John B. Gurdon, he did this experiment on frog. So he took this frog cell, which is from the Xenopus laevis, and he exposed those with the ultraviolet light so that its nucleus is destroyed. And now what you get is the enucleated egg cell, which is the nucleus has been removed from that cell. And then he took two different type of cells. One he took from the frog embryo, a less differentiated cell, and then he also took the frog tadpole and took the fully differentiated intestinal cell. So two type of cells were taken, and now what the major object here is the enucleated egg cell. So then he took the nucleus from the less differentiated cell and put that in this egg cell which is not having nucleus, and now it is transplanting the nucleus from this cell to this cell. Whereas in the case of intestinal cell, again the nucleus was taken and transplanted into this egg cell which is not having a nucleus. So now this egg cell gets nucleus on one hand from the left side from the frog embryo, which is the less differentiated. On the right hand side, it gets from the intestinal cell, which is fully differentiated. Now after this, then it allowed to grow them and continued to have the development process. Then that resulted into two results. So the result A was when transplanted nuclei came from an early embryo or the less differentiated cells, that resulted into most recipient eggs developed into tadpole larva. So it means most of the cloning experiment was successful when it was taken from the less differentiated cells. Whereas when the nuclei came from the fully differentiated intestinal cells, shown in the B side, then only less than 2% of eggs developed into the normal tadpole, which means that the early embryonic developmental stages and the less differentiated cells can be tuned easily to develop into the complete clones and complete organism. So that was the very first evidence and first observation made by John Gurdon that cloning of animals can be performed. But it really became a scientific fiction in 1990s, late 1990s, when Dr. Ian Wilmot, he did experiments on sheep and working on the adult mammal like sheep and trying to make a clone of that was really a big challenge, and that was the big news of that time. So he took one sheep and took the memory cells from that sheep, cultured these memory cells, and then tried to starve those so that the cell cycle gets arrested at the geo phase. And now took this memory cell. From another sheep, he took the egg cell and he removed the nucleus, like what you saw in the Gordon's experiment as well. So now nucleus is removed, which is enucleated egg now. And now he's going to fuse these two, like, the memory cell along with the egg. An idea is, can we take the nucleus of the memory cell and fuse them in the egg cell, which is enucleated? For doing that, one could try different ways of stimulation, sometime electric shock, sometime providing the right culture conditions. These things help for this nucleus to move it inside the cell. And after optimizing those, then he was able to successfully transplant this nucleus to the egg cell from the ovary. Now, some early embryonic developmental stages happen in the culture condition itself in the tube. And then this was implanted into third sheep, which is the surrogate mother. So think about, now you are using three different sheep. One sheep, the cell was taken, other sheep, the egg was taken, you made the embryo, and now you are transplanting him to the third sheep, a surrogate mother. and from where this baby sheep, the dolly, the first lamb which was born, and that became one of the most curious scientific organism of scientific fiction, which really turned into reality. And this work was published in all the top journals in the world. So he's Dr. Ian Wilmot from Scotland, who did this work, and that was really from Rosalind Institute. Really showed the first time the major hurdles were overcome for the mammary, cell-based object which he took and resulted into the adult sheep development. I just happened to have a good opportunity to interact with him and share the stage when I was there at Harvard. So these kind of scientific discoveries have been really motivating to see the scientific fiction per se, from learning from the original cell and the cell cycle, how to control the cell cycle growth, the arrest the cell cycle, and develop into the clones. Right now, this one is an example that cloning always does not come into the exact same perfect organism. So while you want that a clone should be exactly same when you are making a large number of animals, but it may not always be the case, right? So in this case, the CC cat or the carbon copy cat, from the left side and the right side, they're the clones. So nucleus was taken from this particular cat, the rainbow cat, which is having these characteristics, which is the classical feature of a calico cat, which is with orange patches. And then after cloning was performed from this particular cat, on the right hand side, this cat was produced, which is carbon copy CC cat, but it has the gray and white coat. It does not have this kind of orange patches. So therefore, these two cats, while they look very similar, but they were not exactly identical. And people have thought about that all the clones may not result into exactly same appearance. Could be because of many factors, but also because the way in the genetic system, the X chromosome randomly gets inactivated. That could be one of the possibility during the embryonic development, and many factors which are actually associated with embryonic development could be resulted into this type of discrepancies. So while the looking for the adult whole organism cloning was one of the really big scientific fiction, people realize that cloning stem cells can be very important from therapeutic aspects. So stem cells, these are relatively unspecialized cells which can reproduce indefinitely and differentiate into a specialized cell if you provide the appropriate culture conditions. Stem cell will be talked in much more detail with Professor Rahul Purwar. I'm just talking here in the context of cloning. So now if you take these embryonic stem cells and culture those and provide different type of culture conditions, they may develop into liver cell, nerve cell, or blood cell, more specialized cells. Whatever type of culture conditions and media you provide here, that may help the same stem cell to develop into different type of specialized cells, right? And that can have a lot of therapeutic potential. If you think about, somebody gets an accident and they immediately need to transplant some cells, and those kind of things can be very well done with the therapeutic way of embryonic stem cell-based cloning. So these ideas were developed by scientist Dr. Shinya Yamanaka, who took the stem cells and the skin fibroblast cells were developed. And when he added different type of genes which were transcription factors to induce these skin fibroblast cells with the genes like OCT34 or SOX2 or KLF4 or c-MYC, they resulted into induced pluripotent stem cells, iPS cells. So that was the first time he was able to show that with the these kind of transcription factors, by modifying the stem cell, you can result into the clone of the stem cell induced pluripotent stem cells. So these were some of the most landmark scientific studies which has happened in the areas of cloning and stem cell research. Dr. Sir John B. Gurdon, which I spoke about the frog cloning work, and Dr. Shinya Yamanaka, they both showed that the mature cells can be reprogrammed to become pluripotent. And for their novel contributions, they were awarded Nobel Prize in 2012. While these were happening, in this area, of course, this was the biggest challenge in the scientific field, the direct reprogramming of the cell with the defined factor and how that could be taken forward and developed into either the adult organism or the pluripotent stem cells. Uh, but while this kind of basic research were happening, there were many other scientists who were also working on developing these concepts further. And one I showed here, Dr. Wang Gusuk from Korea, uh, he cloned many animals and he modified livestock, dairy cow, Korean cow, and he really published very well in all the top journals in Nature and Science. And in 2004, he showed that even embryonic stem cell could be made with very simple method of somatic cell nuclear transfer or SCNT. I will not ask questions on this slide about these technicalities. So do not worry about if you do not understand these in detail. But I just want to give you the idea that people were trying to clone different animals and different organisms by playing with the cell and the conditions. And then this research was published in most prestigious journal of science, 2004 and 5, when Dr. Wang Wusuk and his team provided evidences that these pluripotent human embryonic stem cells could be produced. Of course, for his work, he became really the star in South Korea and pride of Korea. But very sad that after a couple of years, his research was found to be fraudulent. Many of the research results which they reported were not reproducible, and people really, took this idea forward, complained against him. Journal started inquiry against the scientist, and finally he was sentenced to jail. So you have to be really cautious, when you really want to work in these spaces. You should not be over ambitious and try to do fraudulent work. Now, other scientist, Dr. Haruko Obokata from Riken Center in Japan, she reported a cellular reprogramming phenomenon known as STAP, or stimulus-triggered acquisition of pluripotency, where she said, like, unlike Dr. Shinya Yamanaka, who told for doing the iPS cells, you need a lot of transcription factors and right conditions to be added. But here she said, okay, just simply change the pH of the medium, and just by changing that, the cell could actually acquire the pluripotency, and that became a stimulus-triggered acquisition of pluripotency or STAP phenomenon, for which she published papers in Nature journal, in 2014 and these are both the studies in 2014. So again, this was a very prestigious scientific journal and a big landmark study. She was in fact being considered that she should be awarded the Nobel Prize, and she should be given a lot of recognition for her work. But after a couple of months and a year, her research was again having a lot of issues, and people found that she committed scientific fraudulent. So she was actually suspended from Riken Center, and the entire team who was working along with her really got punishment. So while we have seen that there are some real stars who have contributed to the basic science, Sir John B. Gurdon for the frog cloning, Dr. Shinya Yamanaka for induced pluripotent stem cell, and were rewarded Nobel Prizes for their contribution. On the other hand, there has been scientists like Dr. Haruko Bokata and Dr. Wang Wusuk who did make effort into working in this area of research, but on the way they became more greedy, and their research resulted into fraudulent results, and that really let not only them but also the institutes feel ashamed about these work. So it's really important that while you are all now starting fresh at IIT Bombay and you still haven't come to the campus, but you are being exposed with different lectures, different activities to become part of IIT Bombay, you have to keep in mind that now you are part of a prestigious institute. Your work ethics, your research, your original ideas will take you forward very high, and you will represent IIT Bombay and India to many national and international forum. But when you're part of the team, even if anybody commits the mistake, the entire team gets penalized. And once you are, having those issues, you, your team, and your institute all gets, their image gets tarnished. So it's really important that your reputation is very valuable position. Once it is tarnished, it is really impossible to fully restore. You're starting very fresh. Please make sure that your ethics into your courses, your research, your projects, everything, it should reflect the best quality. All right, so just to summarize, today we spoke about the origin of cell and evolutionary context. We try to discuss the context of how mitochondria and chloroplast got originated. We then talked about cell division, which results into genetically identical daughter cells. The cell cycle, where the mitotic phase alternates with the interphase, and we discussed about different phases of the cell cycle. Meiosis is going to reduce the number of chromosome sets from diploid to haploid. And then we discussed about the cell cycle regulation and different factors which are responsible for that. And if they become dysregulated, it may result into disease like cancer. Very briefly, we touched upon the concept of cloning, where we saw that from these cells you can develop the complete organism, which is the product is identical to the parent. And then we also touched upon some of the biggest landmark studies in the field of cloning and cell reprogramming, which resulted into Nobel Prizes as well as big punishments in the scientific field, which also gives you some food for thought to think about ethics in your studies, in your research, and your publications.